as looking at the Syrian refugee crisis, and it still remains the largest displacement crisis in the world, and paying the highest price are children. So there is a lost generation there. So we ask, can they rise to the task of this new momentum? Our panel first will start off with a speech from each guest and each speaker and move on to a roundtable discussion. And finally, we will be asking your questions, so feel free to write in the chat box throughout while you're listening. Let me introduce now my guests. Thank you very much again for joining us this evening for the third series of Turkey-EU Relations seminar. Andreas Papaconstantinou, Director for Neighbourhood and Middle East with the Directorate General for European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations. Laura Batella-Adam, the Secretary General of the EU-Turkey Forum. Professor Kemal Kirisci, Non-Resident Senior Fellow at Brookings Institution. Professor Şebnem Köster Akçapar, Sociology Professor at Ankara Social Sciences University. Professor Martin Ruhs, Chair in Migration Studies and Deputy Director of the Migration Policy Center at the European University, and Associate Professor Saime Öztürmez, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Bilkent University. Well, thank you again for joining us this evening. So as I said, we're starting with the speeches, and I give the floor to Andreas Papaconstantinou.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I would like to thank the Circle Foundation for this invitation to this webinar discussion, which I understand is the third one in a very interesting series of discussions on EU-Turkey relations. So as you know, DG ECHO is the Directorate General for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations with the European Commission. And we provide humanitarian assistance based on humanitarian needs. And our mandate is to protect, to prevent, and alleviate the human suffering while ensuring the dignity of the affected people. Under the EU-Turkey statement, DG ECHO's actions have been implemented under the facility for refugees in Turkey. And those are focused on providing humanitarian assistance to the refugees in cooperation with the Turkish authorities and our implementing humanitarian partners. And as part of the facility, the European Union has fulfilled its commitments, contracted fully the 6 billion euros in assistance to refugees in Turkey, pledged by the European Union. Over 4 billion have already been disbursed, and more than 100 projects have been implementing, delivering support to millions of refugees. So within the overall EU-Turkey relationship, I believe that we can safely say that the continued collaboration between 680,000 pupils to attend school, and it's implemented together with UNICEF, the Turkish Red Crescent, and the Turkish authorities. So the humanitarian actions under the facility, under the statement, have been fully delivered. And so far, all humanitarian actions have been carried forward in a very good way. But now we are in a new post-facility phase. We are on the humanitarian side implementing projects under additional funding that we secured last year, over 530 million euros, to continue fulfilling the needs of the refugee population. And this additional funding I just mentioned was based solely on the refugees' needs. And this reflects the EU's commitment to continue supporting the refugees in Turkey also beyond the time frame of the facility. Clearly, there are challenges ahead. We are aware that Turkey is the country hosting the biggest refugee population in the world. Turkey is doing an extraordinary job on this front, and the European Commission reaffirms its strong appreciation to Turkey for this. We are also aware that the refugee needs will continue, and that the consequences of both the economic downturn in Turkey and the COVID pandemic that you referred to a short while ago continue to aggravate the situation of the refugees. As you are aware, in a statement following the European Council of March, the EU member states invited the Commission to present a proposal to the Council for the continuation of financing for Syrian refugees in Turkey, as well as in Jordan and Lebanon, by the way, and other parts of the region. And President Ursula von der Leyen, after her meeting with President Erdogan on the 6th of April, stated that the European Commission will continue to support refugees and host communities. And by this, we are supporting Turkey, a country that is hosting 4 million refugees, in living up to this challenge. President von der Leyen confirmed that basic humanitarian needs, education, and healthcare will remain priorities. But she also stressed, and that's an important point, that EU funding should in the future increasingly create opportunities for refugees to earn their own livelihood. I do not only want to stress the Commission's commitment on future funding, but also I want to go back to this point made by President von der Leyen on the future support, because it focuses on the longer term sustainability and the gradual transition into the Turkish system. So any future support should also focus on enhancing the sustainability of our actions by strengthening the self-reliance of the refugees and the reduction of their aid dependency. Turkey and the European Union stand together on the support to refugees in Turkey, and the EU and Turkey need to pave the way for a longer-term strategy, and more importantly, to create and provide better and successful livelihood opportunities for the refugees. This is also a very important element here in Brussels, since we need to convince the EU member states and the European Parliament to continue the assistance for refugees in Turkey. Indeed, it is a point I would like to stress, that the European Parliament and the member states and Council have to agree to providing the necessary budget to continue supporting refugees in Turkey. And we'll look very critically, they will look at how the additional funding is going to be spent and how a future transition will be included in that respect. Only if we achieve to manage to bring our assistance to this next level, we will ensure that the support to refugees in Turkey remains a success story, as I said previously. We are now, as we speak, working very hard on the future package I mentioned, in order to continue providing this support. We are looking forward to the outcome of the meeting, of the discussion of the heads of state and government at the European Council at the end of this month, on the 24th and 25th of June. It will provide us with guidance on the future of our support. Many thanks, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Andreas, Papaconstantinou. And now to give their remarks, second is Professor Şebnem Köserakçı.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind invitation. And thank you, Andreas. Actually, there are definitely good stories to share and a couple of good practices and not so good ones. 5 years have passed since the March 18th, 2016 agreement, as you know, and there are some changes in the migration scene in Turkey. Like, first of all, a new migration agreement should include non-Syrians as well. Back in 2016, as you know, there were around 2 million Syrians. Now the numbers are much higher, around 4.5 million non-Syrians. So money allocated for burden sharing is definitely not enough since the migration continues in large numbers. And pushbacks, also the second one is pushbacks should stop. And this puts the migrants and asylum seekers in dangerous way by violating their basic human rights. And the third one is migration was only one item in the EU-Turkey deal, back in 2016. And other items on the agenda then were customs union, of course, visa-free travel, high-level negotiations, etc. And Turkey is a candidate country, should expect to be treated as such. And the fourth one is to ease and facilitate safe and voluntary return. And Turkey, many times Turkey addressed that they want to work, or the Turkish officials want to work with the EU in northern Syria. That was also the item number 9 back in 2016, but never discussed. And the fifth one, of course, more cooperation along the eastern borders is necessary, not only borders along the EU. Well, I will mention a couple of problems or challenges, one is actually the EU migration asylum policy. It seemed that it failed in 2015, maybe even long before that. So the EU Pact on Migration, the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum will impose even more strict measures. If people find a way to apply for asylum, in case they're rejected, for example, they will be sent back to countries of origin, while expecting some member states to show solidarity to host new arrivals and accepted cases. And this proposed plan of the Commission is nothing but reinforcing Fortress Europe, and in sharp contrast with the liberal democracies, international laws and conventions, human rights, and the right to asylum and seek protection. And it seems that this pact will not change much, and it already underlines deep divisions on this issue, on migration issue within the EU. So when we look at source countries, for example, we can also expect that there will be even higher migration pressures after the pandemic. In the global south, existing vulnerabilities have risen and inequalities have deepened, not only due to the pandemic, but also due to economic problems related with the pandemic, perhaps. And remembering Ulrich Beck, we live in a risk society. There are uncertainties about the future, about climate change, and many social ills and environmental problems that accompany climate issues, such as fueling extreme poverty, ethnic problems, droughts, floods, access to clean water, just to name a few. And we should expect that the human beings, when given a chance, even with little available resources, would seek alternative lives elsewhere. And that means migration. While that does not necessarily mean crossing international borders, we know from empirical evidence that internal displacement may trigger international migration sooner or later. A case study is Afghanistan. So one other problem that we keep forgetting is irregular migrants and asylum seekers use the same routes, and the majority of them come from the same countries of origin, and they should be also able to look asylum easily, and their human security should be prioritized. However, external processing of asylum applications are underway. The Danish parliament just approved a bill recently that would allow the asylum seekers or sending asylum seekers to third countries outside the EU, including not so safe countries in Africa, for example, until their applications are processed. So unfortunately, the law also suggests that an asylum seeker may be retained in that third country, wherever that is, even his or her application is approved. So externalization of migration and asylum dominates the EU-Turkey relations as well. So Turkey is protecting EU's borders for a long time now, but so is Libya, so is Morocco and Tunisia, etc. And this brings us to another problem. Almost at the turn of the 21st century, migration scholars defined the upcoming century as the age of migration. 20 years later, we can easily define it at the age of bulls. In fact, Tim Marshall, it just stands here, just released a book with the same title. So he writes, and I quote, "We are seeing walls being built along borders everywhere. half of these borders were erected between 2000 and now. Within a few years, the EU could have more miles of walls, fences, barriers on their borders than there were at the height of the Cold War, and unquote. So, of course, I should mention also the new facilities at the Turkish-Greek border. So the main reason of walls is obviously to stop unwanted migration, but building walls also point out these extreme divisions in wealth, race, religion, nationality, as well as politics at the personal, local, national, and international levels. Now there's another wall under the name of vaccination card. It seems that I cannot travel to certain countries in the EU because I have the Sinovac and not the EU recognized vaccines. Well, social exclusion, integration problems, us versus them dichotomy. These are the end results of another wall that we build in our societies today. And there are real and perceived threats. The link between migration and international terrorism is not one of them. First, radicalism is not brought by refugees, but by not integrated, casted aside, discontent masses of a small minority of second generation. Second, migrants are not taking the jobs of local people, but replacing them in 4D jobs. And 4D, before it was 3D, now I say 4D, because dirty, difficult, dangerous, and demeaning jobs in this neoliberal order with very low salaries and no social benefits. Third, there is a misperception regarding Islamization of the EU. In fact, 6% of the EU population consisted of Muslims back in 2010, and this is projected to increase to only 8% by 2030. So I mentioned lots of problems and challenges. Perhaps in the second round, if I were given a voice, I will tell you, I would like to explain what to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Şebnem, for that, and a lot to discuss there, especially on the challenges and where we are today. And next to give their remarks, Professor Kemal Kirisci. You have to unmute, Professor Kemal.
Yeah, procedures. Thank you. I think Şebnem Hocam very much addressed what is missing in the glass. Andreas talked about what is in the glass. And I think I'm going to pick it up from where Andreas left. Andreas made a reference to how this agreement between the European Union and Turkey that we're focusing on needs to be taken to the next level. And I think Andreas' focus was the facility for refugees in Turkey, known as FRIT. And I'd like to focus my remarks on what this next level could be. From the remarks that Andreas has made, the outlines of that next level is out there. What is it that we need to get the refugees' reliance on assistance, humanitarian assistance and socioeconomic assistance down, to wean them out of dependency on this assistance? That's one part of the outline. The other part of the outline is to get them, to use Andreas's term, earn own livelihoods. Okay. Now, the question that I'd like to address, how are we going to do this? The funds provided by the European Union has been mostly distributed through international non-governmental organizations, as well as United Nations agencies. Time is limited. I won't go into the details, but the spending of the funds have been monitored and evaluated very closely. And there are reports that go into the details of where this money is going and how it is being spent. Part of that part of those funds have been spent on livelihood. And when I look at it, I recognize that most of those funds concerning creation of livelihood has addressed the supply side of accessing livelihood. What does that mean? That means that Syrian refugees' ability to access the labor market has been supported. What is it? Exercises like learning Turkish, helping them to participate in vocational training, acquire abilities that for which there would be demand in the labor market. I have come across projects such as writing CVs, although I remain a little bit skeptical as to how much writing CVs will help, given that most of the refugees operate in the informal economy. But what I would argue is that the next level must focus on creating demand for refugee labor, right? Especially given how Andreas have already mentioned or alluded to, the Turkish economy is not where it was when Syrian refugees first began to arrive. In 2013, Turkish per capita income was almost $13,000. Turkey was about to graduate to high income countries. Today, the Turkish per capita income is falling towards $8,000 per capita. I won't go into the details as to why this is happening, but this is a reality. And that reality has been complicated by COVID, as Ayca, the moderator, has mentioned. So to come back, the Turkish economy is strained and challenged as to creating demand for Syrian refugees. So for that, I would suggest to go and study the Global Compact on Refugees, which provides a number of innovative ideas specifically for creating demand for refugee labor in general, not specifically in Turkey. And we must not forget that the Global Compact on Refugees was adopted on the heels of the 2015-16 European migration crisis. Had there been no migration crisis, there would have not been a Global Compact on Refugees. And it is also a compact that aims to address the protracted situation in which overwhelming majorities of refugees find themselves in the developing world. Against this background, personally and humbly, the compact has a great idea, and those of you who are interested can go to paragraph 70, suggesting that countries that are hosting large number of refugees should be provided with trade facilitation. The idea that products from countries, products that involve refugee labor should be extended easier access to the markets of developing world. We can go into the details. I appreciate Turkey and the EU has customs union, but then there's other areas, for example, agricultural area or semi-processed product. That's one area that could be explored in the next level between the EU and Turkey. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the European Commission, in response to the instructions given by the President of the Commission, may be looking at this. The United States, right after the Second World War, in an effort to address the Arab-Israeli conflict at the Madrid conference, had come up with qualified industrial zones. This is an area that could be explored. So companies that operate in such zones can see their products accessing not just the European Union, but also the United States, Australia, Canada, etc., more easily, as long as they employ refugees properly through proper certification. This is the kind of ideas, very specific ideas, that I, again, humbly suggest that the next level ought to address. 2 more minutes, Ayca Hanım, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
At the next level, what ought to be addressed is also the methodology with which the European Union funds are put into good work. I support Andreas's point there. I think those funds have benefited refugees and Turkey significantly. Imagine where we would be if there had not been those funds, but much more can be done. In the methodology, and you can look it up from the Commission websites too, if you look at the tables that shows the distribution of those funds, meaning who those funds were given to, you are not going to find any Turkish NGOs. NGOs are not listed in the European Commission's partnership agreements. Today, as a, dare I say, as a professor who has addressed these issues since 1989, I'd like to argue that today there are very powerful, successful Turkish NGOs. And rather than using NGOs as subcontractors to international non-governmental organizations and losing important proportions of those funds to administrative costs, I think these NGOs, the European Commission should encourage and hold the hands of such Turkish NGOs. I can name such NGOs if necessary, to sign these partnership agreements. And we must not forget that these NGOs are under such work pressure that often they simply do not have the resources and the time to put these agreements to get together. That's the methodology part. If there is time, Ayca Hanım, I would like to expand more on this, but addressing this methodology issue would also help with sustainable development goals, especially a very specific one, the 17 one.
We'll do so in the questions, if that's okay, so I can give the same amount of time.
I think we need to address the resettlement issue seriously, not with just 27,000 quotas, but more. I shall address it if there is any questions that are directed to me on that issue. Thank you. Sorry for going over my time.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you very much, Kemal Kirisci. So next to give their remarks, Laura Batale-Adder.
Thank you, Ayca, and thank you to the Circle Foundation for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be surrounded by friends and experts to discuss this very timely topic as negotiations are going on. I actually had in mind to maybe go back a little bit in time and fast forward to understand where we are in terms of the EU-Turkey statement and our relations with Turkey. But I also feel now compelled to maybe contribute to some of the discussions that have been open, which have become very technical, I have to say, but I very much needed. And I think now these discussions that are going on already for a year, over a year, on how to renew this deal require us to make the most of this momentum to adapt this so-called deal to the needs of today. I mean, not only COVID-19, but there have also been a number of other challenges along the way. I mean, when this deal was negotiated in 2016 and how the situation is right now, 5 years later, not only in terms of the migration situation, but also, and more importantly, I would say, EU-Turkey relations deserves reviewing it in a way that we can make this deal work more efficiently. Because depending on who you ask, the success of this deal can be contested in a way. It has clearly help to reduce the number of arrivals to the EU, but this shouldn't be the only way in which we measure its implementation and effectiveness, obviously. And the thing is that most of the components of the deal, interestingly or ironically, were not migration related, but politically related. And I think, and I will explain further at the end of my intervention why this has been problematic. And this is one of the key questions being discussed now on how big this political dimension should be in a renewed deal. And I think we are getting already indications that these two elements, the migration-related elements and the political ones related to the EU accession process, visa liberalization talks, or the custom union, should be disentangled. And I can already say that personally, I think that this would be in the benefit of the deal and in the benefit of EU-Turkey relations. Maybe I will start with Kemal's last point about resettlements. In the sense that we see how the number of arrivals have been indeed decreased. But when we look at the other elements of the deal, like the number of resettlements or the returns, we have been largely problematic and actually in practice not happened at all. I think this is one of the elements where I believe that the EU is also willing to commit more to strengthen the responsibility sharing and maybe creating an EU-wide resettlement scheme to support Turkey in this case, coping with this large number of refugees. The numbers remain very low. I mean, I think to date, it has been only 28,000 resettled refugees into the EU, but it also relates about what Professor Shebnem was explaining about the wider political will of the member states of the European Union to share more responsibility and to also show more solidarity towards other member states that are facing wider pressure on a migration front, like the frontline states, like Greece being one of them, but also Spain, Italy, and a few others. And we also need to address in this future deal the side effects of this statement and the situation that it has led countries like Greece, for instance, with the overburden of its refugee camps and the dramatic humanitarian situation that is being lived there. So I think it requires these political negotiations that are ongoing to address where the statement has failed to produce its desired impact, and also restructure it in a way that it becomes more efficient and also prioritizes the needs of refugees. And when saying this, I would like to refer not only to maybe the situation of Syrian refugees in Turkey, those who are under the protection scheme, but also those non-Syrian refugees who are not under the umbrella of this protection regime and are actually subject to very basic rights. And this is important, and I think this is part of the discussions. I think the EU is open to include non-Syrians in their protection schemes. Because this is something that in the future we are seeing, for instance, most of the returns from Greece to Turkey are mostly non-Syrians. So this is already a reality, and I think it should be looked upon. And also to connect to what Kemal was saying about, I think we should look now further ahead. I mean, it's been more than 10 years that some of these refugees have been in the country, some of them. So by now, their needs have been changing, and some of them are now, I would say, their basic needs have been covered, although due to COVID-19, we have seen a regression in meeting those of these basic needs. But I think it's important to think about the future funding. How will it be spent and what should become a priority? Moving, and I know Ayca has been working on this, I mean, shifting from this more humanitarian aspect of these funds towards supporting livelihoods of refugees. And the question, and also addressing a question that I know it's very sensitive in Turkey, but requires a debate, maybe not publicly, but politically for sure, which is the future integration of these refugees or harmonization, as it's called in Turkey. I think there is a need to continue supporting the livelihoods, as Kemal was saying, not only when it comes to the labor integration, which remains one of the main challenges in Turkey, to integrate them in the labor market, but also looking further ahead. I mean, this needs to be, we would need to think on how to scale up many of these projects that have been implemented over the past years, which can be considered to be the main success of the EU-Turkey statement. They need to be scaled. They need to be, they need to reach more Syrian population in the country and not only benefit a few, and to really make, now I think there's a need for a new needs assessment to see how the situation is on the ground, and then based on that, plan for the next projects in the next years. I know these conversations are difficult because they require political will. I mean, there's a lot of technical discussions ongoing on where these funds are going to come from and how is this going to be institutionalized. I know that the working group monitoring the implementation of the facility can be considered to be one of the most, in my opinion, successes when it comes to technically discussing aspects between EU-Turkey relations. And I think it has delivered, and it's a platform where these discussions could take place, but also putting a bit more pressure on how this integration element could be integrated into the future discussions. I know I'm now running out of time, but maybe just to go through the political elements and these discussions that are happening at the moment. I think we've seen there is the political will to renew this deal. It's on the table, both financially, but also politically, because only both sides will benefit from this cooperation. I mean, both sides need each other. And unfortunately, the problem that we see when it comes to meeting some of its elements has been that both the EU and Turkey have elevated this issue of migration at the top of their political agenda, and has, I would say, both sides have instrumentalized it at some point. So I think this would need to be disentangled in a way. So by separating the migration component from the other political discussions, which I think is what the Council and its member states are trying to do by offering Turkey a positive agenda, would be a way to move forward. But we shouldn't forget that while there has been a lot of recriminations on both sides, and especially from the Turkish side towards the EU for not having met these political aspects of the deal, I think we need to remind ourselves that these aspects have mainly not been met due to political developments in Turkey and other bilateral issues between Turkey and the EU. So there are a number of benchmarks that need to be fulfilled when it comes to the visa liberalization talks, for instance, or even the customs union that remain unmet. So I think now we have seen a de-escalation of the bilateral relationship over the last year, which is very positive. And I think it's a moment to build this momentum and to find ways in which these obstacles can be met technically, so we can also progress on the political aspects of our relationship. And I will stop it here.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. And I think you have summed it up quite well, especially from what each speaker has raised there before you. And certainly from the last two discussions I have had, and remembering the visit of Ursula von der Leyen, I can say we talk about the new momentum, but sometimes I feel that we are walking on a thread and we're choosing our words so carefully, just not so we don't crash this building up of the new momentum again. And I do believe that I feel there's not enough information when I listen to what is about to come or what is about to be made as a deal, and how to overcome those challenges that are there. I know that, I mean, Turkey and EU have had their rocky relationship, but they have always been together no matter what. So, but for me, I wonder when we can overcome that real threat, the thin line that we're walking on, and actually cross over and open up to those challenges. So that's from what I have gained so far from the three series that we have talked. And next to give their remarks is Martin Ruhs.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be part of this panel. I will use the few minutes I have for my opening remarks to share with you some of the results of research that we've recently conducted and published a couple of weeks ago on public attitudes to the EU-Turkey statement and to the EU-Turkey cooperation on migration more broadly, public attitudes in Turkey, in Greece, and in Germany as the three countries that are centrally affected, or among the countries that are centrally affected by the cooperation. This research is part of a larger report that we did on the EU-Turkey cooperation on migration, and Professor Saime Oturumes, who's also on this panel, was also a co-author of this larger report. So I'm delighted to see that Saime is with us today as well. So public attitudes, or what we call public policy preferences for cooperation on migration. Why did we do this work? Not because we think that policies should be made based on public attitudes, obviously not, but public attitudes and how voters think about policies, obviously to some extent constitute a constraint on policymaking, certainly in the longer term, and they matter for the political legitimacy of different types of policies. So what we did was we conducted survey experiments with 3,900 voters across Turkey, Greece, and Germany, about 1,300 voters in each of these countries. There were national samples that were representative of the country's voting age population with regard to gender, age, and regions where people live. And rather than asking people what they thought about the different parts of the cooperation, so what do you think about resettlement, what do you think about financial assistance for refugees, we asked people to compare different types of policy packages, because the deal, of course, is multidimensional and has different policy dimensions in it. And so we asked people to consider and to assess different types of cooperation, hypothetical cooperation agreements. And I should say that we only focused on the core dimensions of the agreement, so only on the migration-related dimensions. So we did not include the visa liberalization, customs union, and EU accession. And what this methodology allows you to do is to identify which types of policies generate support or opposition to the overall cooperation among the public, among voters. So I'll just share with you 3 or 4 key findings. So in terms of the big picture finding, our study suggests that voters in Germany, Greece, and Turkey do support the core features of the current EU-Turkey cooperation based on the EU-Turkey statement. Most of the alternative policy packages that we analyzed reduce support rather than increase support. So in a fundamental way, there is general support among the public in Germany, in Greece, and in Turkey for cooperation on these issues. A few more specific findings. In Germany and Greece, so among German and Greek voters, we found considerable opposition to pushbacks. So to the idea of sending migrants who arrive irregularly, sending them back from Greece to Turkey without first considering their claims or applications for asylum. There's considerable opposition to that among Greek and German voters. German and Greek voters, we found, do support EU financial assistance for refugees in Turkey, but under certain conditions. And the condition is that these funds, the support, is channeled through humanitarian organizations, as is currently the case, and not given as direct budget support to the Turkish government. So what we basically find is that if you think about public views and public preferences, the channel of financial assistance, the way in which it is given matters for public support. Of course, this is significant because we know that one of the arguments and one of the grievances on the Turkish side has been that the financial assistance has been given primarily via humanitarian organizations and not enough, according to the Turkish government, as far as I understand it, not enough in the form of direct budget support. If you think just about how the public thinks about these issues, they support financial assistance, but not if it is given directly as budget support to the Turkish government. And finally, we have an interesting finding on resettlement. So as part of the different policy packages, we introduced a hypothetical policy of resettling each year 1% of the Syrian refugee population in Turkey to the EU. So that's roughly about 36,000 refugees each year resettled from Turkey to the EU. And we found that this hypothetical policy is preferred to the current one-to-one system by voters in all the three countries. So by Germans, Greeks, and Turkish voters prefer a hypothetical policy of resettling 1% of Syrian refugees in Turkey, about 36,000 people each year, to the current one-to-one arrangement. So we do take that as evidence that there is support for resettlement, but there is also a preference for a new approach to the resettlement compared to how it's currently stipulated in the EU-Turkey statement. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, then I'll straight away give the last remarks to Simon Öztürmez.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aydogdu. It's always a challenge to be the last speaker among such distinguished speakers who have been so much exposed to the topic and have been really contributors and partners from academia and also the policy world. I'll pick up from where Martin has just left off. We have, just as Martin has mentioned, completed a report on the EU-Turkey cooperation, particularly on the statement. And we had highlighted a couple of messages, and I'd like to highlight two more in addition to what Martin has highlighted. One of them has to do with in the ways in which there's really broad support for the EU humanitarian assistance that has arrived so far in Turkey, and also the fact that it has contributed towards an evolution of the particular international protection toward a social cohesion framework. So that's brilliant, and everybody wants it to be supported even further. Another one resonates what Professor Akçapar has already mentioned about a focus on non-Syrians as well. So migration cooperation for the EU and Turkey would not only be about just Syrians who have arrived in 2011, but would also need to take into account the relationship that has been established a very long time ago from accession negotiations onwards, and recognize that that negotiation and also the migration governance that has arrived today to what it has become with the law on foreigners and international protection, as well as the temporary protection directive, to be taken further for the benefit of everyone who's seeking, in fact, protection in Turkey. And the third point, which was a bit of a controversial point, is that the overall aim of international protection is evidently to support people once they're displaced, but to be supported, also to be complemented by policies that will contribute to reconstruction, in fact, in their home countries, and also to stop that kind of movement to be taking place further and open up the opportunities for return when it is voluntarily expected by these people to their countries of origin. And that already reminds me of the question I had sort of made up for myself and took the liberty to do so. Why do EU and Turkey need to cooperate even further to the future? And it reminded me of, in 2018, I had read a book by Jackie Baba on how can we solve the migration crises. And she had proposed the term distress migration for what has been taking place. And I told myself, and I would like to share with all of my colleagues here, the idea that Turkey and the EU, they really need to cooperate for one major reason. Number one, the sources of displaced migration, conflict, global poverty and global inequality, and increasingly climate change, which Professor Akçapar has already referred to, seem to be very persistent. And in the middle of all this, wherever it's located, Turkey seems to be very centrally involved for a variety of reasons. And for the past decade, it has also, in fact, repeatedly showed that there is a long-term challenge of persistent, different mixed flows of migration, not only forcibly displaced, but other ones that are going to be there. The other face of the coin is that we're now with here scholars who have been studying migration from a variety of perspectives, but that there will be a need for human mobility in the future as well. While the COVID-19 context might have reminded us there had been a particular period within which immobility has been the name of the game, there will be increasing mobility, and we're increasingly being vaccinated to promote that as much as we can and as fast as we can, but that is also going to be there. So the second question I took the liberty of asking myself is, whether the EU and Turkey can cooperate and how so. That complements, I think, some of the points raised by Professor Kirisci here, and I'll pick up on that with 4 major contributions. The first one has to do with the ways in which the fact that Turkey and the EU have had always common interest with respect to migration governance. Why? Because as the Global Compact has also highlighted, there is an increasing interest by all states, despite their diverging policy instruments and reactions at different points in time, which we have observed significantly, of promoting safe, orderly, and regular migration. So Turkey and EU can really cooperate around that. The name of the game might be to stop irregular migration, particularly in the statement. However, the indirect, or perhaps the most notable and noble objective is to promote safe, orderly, and regular migration for Turks and for everybody who seems to be moving through Turkey towards Europe and from Europe towards Turkey and elsewhere. The second one has to do with the preferences, the common preferences that the EU and Turkey have and will continue to have. And that goes back to my point about distress migration. We cannot highlight even further the idea that the mobility of individuals for their own purposes, including for survival migration, as Betts calls it, or any other reason, is to be promoted. But at the same time, this distress migration, whose root causes are definitely challenging human dignity, need to be prevented. And the EU and Turkey have been trying to do that in different parts of the world, including Africa, the Middle East, for a very long time, but have been really challenged by major context-specific risks and challenges. And I recently published through an article in Democratization addressing that particular issue. Why is it so hard for the EU to actually promote resilience building in different countries, especially the ones that are faced by these challenges and are also the sources of these challenges? The third one has to do with the principles that the EU and Turkey seem to be continuously sharing. And I've been repeating that for a while because it's inspiring that the new pact starts with a human and humane approach. And Turkey has been trying to do that in different ways. And why not the EU and Turkey cooperate even further on that? The technical details have been already highlighted by my colleagues. And if there are questions, I can go into details for that too. And the fourth point, and I'll end at there and then say something outside of the box. The third point has to do with policy tools. As I've already noted, Turkey and EU have cooperated for a very long time. And Ms. Aydogdu has already called it a rocky relationship. That was the term I would call as well. You know, we talk about ebbs and flows and ups and downs, etc. But the relationship has not really completely broken itself. But Laura here has mentioned a very important point that we have been thinking about. The statement somehow became a big mixed soup, which requires the tangling of certain issues around migration governance from those that really talk to the EU-Turkey relationship, maybe. But that is a difficult task, so I'll leave that aside. However, in terms of policy tools with respect to border management, with respect to really informing each other and enjoying knowledge exchange on social cohesion, Turkey and the EU have been doing that for a while, and they can continue to do so. My last 3 points are a bit outside of the box, and I think they go to the specifics of what EU-Turkey cooperation can really promote. The first one has to do with protection of youth and resilience of youth, who had been really suffering a lot throughout all these processes of distress migration. The second one relates to the aspects of social trauma that is continuous throughout the post-migration processes and gender-based violence. These are global challenges in forced migration journeys that I think the EU and Turkey can point out even further and try to enjoy and actually focus on with a perspective that has a more comprehensive approach. And the third one has to do with more negotiations and more talk, rather than sort of trying to halt communication between these two partners who have a lot to do together. Thank you very much, Ms. Aydogdu, for giving me the opportunity to be together with so many colleagues that I really respect the work of and so many policymakers, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much for that speech. And also you have all raised quite a lot of answers already from my questions that I was going to ask. And I believe we'll only get through probably 1 or 2 questions as we do have a lot of speakers here who have a lot to share on this issue. But I believe many questions have also been answered already as to the aspects of the challenges and what lies ahead. Andreas, carrying on with you, moving on to sort of already, I believe it is actually a roundtable discussion already, as everyone mentioned each other in their speeches. But I would like to ask you in the next question, from what you have said, especially when you talked about longer term sustainability, how do you see that possible? And what Laura has mentioned, that there is a political dimension there until now within the deals. How can that be moved out in the coming deal, and especially in the changing climate in Europe, as we are moving really away from the European values of without borders and, you know, all being one. And so how do we adapt to the time today and actually make it possible to have a long-term sustainability? Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Andreas, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. So many thanks to you and to all colleagues on the panel for their very insightful comments. So just to go back to the point I made earlier, that we are working now here in Brussels towards a new package, a new financial support package for refugees in Turkey, and the President, Mrs. von der Leyen, has referred to that. The idea, as I said, is to continue the support. And also to ensure, and I appreciate very much the comments that Kemal made, to ensure this longer term sustainability, even within the contours of the current economic situation. We need to move in that direction. We have based our work here on this longer term sustainability and transition strategy. So that's an important element. And we are here at the EU ready to develop areas of cooperation with Turkey, which will allow for I use the keywords that we have tabled, a progressive, proportionate, and reversible approach. So taking into account the challenges and the opportunities to move forward in our common interest in a step-by-step approach. And if of course there are constructive efforts also by Turkey sustained over the next period of time. So the main focus now is the meeting on the 24th and 25th. I tried to say that this meeting, the Circles initiative, is very timely. It's 2 weeks before that important meeting, where we are going to move towards this new phase where we want to be at, where we want to focus on what is doable in the current momentum, and we are going to continue along that line. Now, on the point regarding the statement, we are appreciative, very appreciative of Turkey's hosting of a very substantial number of refugees. The statement remains valid. It is the key framework. And as I said, the EU is delivering on its commitments, and we are looking forward to working closely with our Turkish colleagues and friends.
Well, moving on to Shebnam. So I believe you have raised actually a lot of challenges on migration which lie ahead and which are there, especially how it has changed over the 10 years course and putting Turkey's internal dynamics into it and where we are today. So looking at Turkey though, how do you see the level of integration of Syrians today, and can Turkey's internal dynamics afford them?
Yeah, good question. Of course, you know, we have some good lessons, I mean, good examples actually, but still there are many missing points. Like as Professor Kemal Kirisci said, labor market inclusion is necessary and decent jobs should be introduced to men and women. I'm so pleased to tell you that gender mainstreaming is now in many projects. And before we used to think that, oh, Syrian women do not want to work, Afghan women, oh, cannot do work because it's against their culture. I mean, because we started to see that that people change also. Women also take up responsibility and they use their agency and they want to work outside and contribute to their family's income. So anyway, the tripartite cooperation is also necessary. Governments, national, local, at the local level, at the national level, that's also necessary, because sometimes at the local level, we see I mean, we start to dealing with migration and integration at the local level. And we understand that also at the national level, I suppose. So we should give more opportunities for local governments and also civil society actors working in certain provinces. And international organizations and civil society, definitely there is cooperation now, and there are more civil society actors, which is which is a welcome development. And also the inclusion of private sector. And I'm not talking about private sector in Turkey only, but private sector in the EU. There were some examples of that in Lebanon and to Jordan to a certain extent, but limited. It was very limited. So maybe we should also encourage this private sector involvement, when it comes to integration and, devising projects. And after all, labor, and of course the work permits should be more encouraged, so for Syrians, but also non-Syrians, so that they don't work in the informal economy only, but they should be able to have decent jobs. So after all, having a decent job is a basic requirement for social integration. But but also there is in Turkey there is it's also a project industry, and most of the time, whether we like it or not, more or less similar projects are carried out without bringing change in people's lives. So a proper impact assessment is needed for those projects run, because we know that most of the projects sometimes run $1 million projects and with many actors involved. So a proper impact assessment at the end of each project is needed. And regarding integration, again, of course, we carry out research also here at the Global Research Center on Migration at the Ankara Social Sciences University of Ankara. And we realize that the pandemic also put a severe strain on integration and social inclusion. And not only for Syrians, but or for those under temporary protection or for international protection or under international protection, but all other mixed flows as well. So Lara underlined both sides need each other. And that's also a point that I would like to make. What we need is to use migration, because it's still a positive item on EU-Turkey relations. And we can use migration as a tool for diplomacy and dialogue, obviously without bargaining over refugees and human lives. Therefore, a new migration agreement between Turkey and the EU or statement, whatever you call it, should encompass development and sustainable development, if possible, and fair division of responsibility or burden sharing. A new migration statement should also allow both parties work together against human-induced effects on climate change and climate migration, because it's at our doors. And we need migration and should allow migration flows from a humanitarian and economic perspective. We need migrants.
Well, thank you very much for that, Şebnem. And Kemal Kirisci, moving on to you now. Actually, you wanted to go into some of the details that you already shared in your remarks. But before getting there, whenever we're speaking, I sort of get the sense there is expectations, but there is reality. As in, when a task is set out from the EU, there are some standards that they want to be met. But when you are considering the amount of Syrian refugees already in Turkey and with growing numbers, the reality is how things are run are quite different from the expectations. Can we balance that out? That would be my question to you, Kemal, especially as you mentioned, you wanted to go more in detail to the spending of the funds and how to create different labor and how it should be distributed in Turkey.
Thanks. That's a tough question you're raising with me. I think there is room for improvement. Şebnem Hocam already referred to impact assessment. Just to give you an idea of what she means, Şebnem Hocam, I hope you agree with me. Let me give you an anecdote. One of the most successful municipalities in managing the presence of Syrian refugees in their community is Sultanbeyli municipality. In a very ingenious way, they set up an association to deal with their presence. I can't go into the details. They're doing a marvelous job, and the person that is running it, I think, deserves a position at Ayca, Andreas. His approach, his philosophy, his will, his determination against all odds really deserves recognition. But he did he shared with me an example of what I think Şebnem Hocam has in mind. He said to me, dear Prof, you know, we get all these funds like Turkish language courses, funding for Turkish language courses, and from INGOs and sometimes from the EU directly, they come to assess what we're doing. And the assessment is too metric oriented. How many Syrian refugees did you intend to engage in these Turkish language courses? How many actually participated, on what frequency? Whereas he said, what I would have liked to see is the person that is coming to make the assessment to say, please bring me along one refugee and let me see if they have really learned Turkish or not, right? So that metric issue there needs, I think, to be addressed as an example of what rightly Şebnem Hocam referred to. That's the methodologies side. We can go into other details. But I'd like to use this, whatever little time is left, to raise a number of challenges that we face. One challenge was embedded in the question that you addressed to Şebnem Hocam, and no offense meant, Şebnem Hocam, I think you skirted around it. And your question, can Turkish dynamics afford integration? I think this is a very important question. Turkish public opinion is not happy with the refugees. I think there are lots of public opinion surveys that reveal it. The economic situation is aggravating it. So that leaves the Turkish government in a very difficult situation. On the one hand, the ideas, innovative ideas from the Global Compact that I shared with you is tempting. But then if you move in that direction, what that means is that you're going to make their presence permanent. Once you're providing jobs in the public opinion, it's going to be clear. They are not here temporarily. How do you get over, how do you resolve this dilemma is going to be a challenge. And I think the European Union needs to be receptive and engaging in that exercise. And Andreas, I must say that I got a little bit cold feet when you said that your approach is a progressive, proportional, and reversible one. I had noticed that in the new pact too, somewhere in the new pact, there was the idea of carrots, but also sticks. Such a stick that really got me concerned, which suggested that visas would not be extended to countries that are not cooperating on migration with the European Union. I think that stick strategy should not at least be expressed publicly. In practice, it might be there, but stating it openly, I think is going to raise eyebrows. Martin's survey.
Just because we won't have another round of questions, we won't have time for that. So if Andreas wants to pop in here and answer quickly, if he would like to give an answer, then I'll carry on with the other speakers. Andreas, would you like to contribute to that?
Yeah. I made reference to I said keywords that are in a report that is public, Kemal. It's the EU-Turkey State of Play of the Relation report that was submitted by HRVP Borrell to the European Council. So it's the line. But I fully agree with you that we want to put forward a number of areas of cooperation, from migration management to economic ties to high-level dialogues, to people-to-people contacts. That there is an offer which is coupled with in case the situation evolves differently with a number of political and economic consequences. You call them sticks. There's no keyword sticks in this report. I see what you mean. But again, as I said, this is the report. It's a calm report. It's a sober report. It is a matter-of-fact report, but it will feed into the decision-making that will take place later this month. And the calm front, on many issues is conducive to a good discussion. But I want to refer to the overall context, which is being analyzed, assessed by the European Commission, and of course submitted to the member states. And as I said, there is an offer on the table. Let's see to it that this is the offer that is going to be taken up.
Okay, well, to use the time wisely, because we have, as we have many speakers, we don't have much time left. I will continue with Laura here. Laura, so I want to get in one question, because we won't be able to get question from our listeners here who have joined us tonight, this evening. So the one question is asked by someone not given a name. Angela Merkel was a strong supporter of Turkey-EU migrant deal, and she pushed within the EU to assist Turkey on migrants, as she will not stand on the next term. Do you think the migrant deal with Turkey will be negatively affected? And I want to embed that into my questions. How do you see member states at large looking at the new deal with Turkey?
Thank you for the question as well from the audience. I think at this point in time, it will not change. I think all member states are convinced that this deal needs to be renewed. So it was crucial. I mean, Merkel's role was crucial back in 2015 in the midst of what was called a refugee crisis, which was in reality a management crisis of the migration situation, but not a migrant or a crisis in that regard, or refugee one. So I think this will be impacted. We need to see what will be the future migration policy of Germany. But when it comes to the deal, I think now there is clearly, I mean, the discussions are undergoing. So we will be seeing this deal being hopefully put on the table at some point. But this doesn't mean that the negotiations are easy. And of course, there are different sensitivities and approaches that the different member states have towards Turkey, also due to their bilateral relations, or as well because of different regional tensions at the moment. So there are different blocks of countries within the European Union having different positions towards Turkey. But I think what we have seen in the last months with a changing rhetoric from also the Turkish government, and also a different one coming from those member states in the EU who have been a bit more critical or vocal against Turkey's actions in the Eastern Mediterranean, namely France, but also Greece and Cyprus. I think we are reaching an understanding that the two sides need to cooperate and sit down, because there are many different interests that both sides have in common in order to, I mean, it would be damaging for both sides to boycott this relationship. So I think the need is clear. And I think also in light of the fact that the EU hasn't managed to come up with a comprehensive migration and asylum policy of its own. So it continues to rely on third countries for that. And I think the EU-Turkey deal has become the blueprint for the other deals that the EU has with external third countries. So I think for the good or bad, the two actors are bound to continue cooperating. There are, of course, some disagreements on the way that relate more to political issues, but I think we will be seeing, or that's the hope, in the interest of refugees themselves at the end of the day as well, that this support from the EU will continue, because this, as it was said before, it's quite likely that they will continue in the country for the years to come. So I think it's in their interest that we provide the necessary support for them.
Well, Laura, from the talks tonight to this evening, I can gather that as we are, after 10 years, at a point still where we are seeing the largest displacement in numbers, and that the Syria crisis, the refugee crisis, is not improving, and actually that numbers are growing and the problems are increasing, and political dimensions when it comes to humanitarian aid and refugee crisis actually have to be put aside, although that's not always realistic, of course, in the world that we are today here. And Martin, continuing with you there, to looking at the EU, moving on from, especially when we talked about the migration policy, and that the member states can't come together on this and agree. To what extent is the EU ready for a future migrant and refugee crisis, and in terms of internal dynamics, EU population's reaction, as well as the capacity and capability of EU member states in coping in terms?
Well, I think in terms of its readiness, I mean, as I said, I think as we heard today as well from the other panelists, I think there is widespread agreement among EU member states on the need to cooperate with non-EU countries on these issues. There is public support for certain types of cooperation. But of course, to deal with an unexpected large inflow of asylum seekers and other migrants, you also need functioning processes for internal solidarity within the European Union. And we know that there has been very little progress on that front. Now, today we spoke about the relationship between EU and Turkey, but of course, when you talk about EU-Turkey cooperation, it's important to also talk about Greece and the dynamics between Greece and the rest of the European Union. And of course, the EU-Turkey cooperation, the statement has had some highly adverse consequences in some areas, including for migrants stranded in some of the reception centers under terrible conditions on the Greek islands. So internal solidarity, very limited progress. It's a very difficult issue. But I think if the question is Europe ready to deal with another wave of unexpected and large inflows? I think the answer has to be, it can only be ready if it sorts out the internal dynamics and the internal solidarity issues. And so far, I've seen very little evidence of that.
And thank you, Martin. So moving on to Saima, I know as you are last, your job is always the hardest because this is the last minutes we have, and we won't have any more questions after this one. So basically, I would like to, although I've been maybe a little bit pessimistic myself here, leave on a future note, on a hopeful note. What kind of deal would you like to see happening, and what do you see for the future?
I see a brighter future, Ayca. Now that you have given me the clue that I have to be optimistic, I had no other sentences to. Well, I mean, the brighter future is, I think all of us here as panelists and probably our attendees as well, agreed on one major matter, that we need to cooperate. I mean, it's not only Turkey and the EU, but internally, as Martin just mentioned, within the EU, the states among themselves, and also externally to agree on what we have been all highlighting, a safe and orderly and regular movement of people to be promoted. So on that note, I mean, the brighter future also lies on the actors themselves. One of the major matters here is when politics gets involved in matters of policy, there's always a sort of a taint that could always become, problematic. And we're hoping that that will not be against whatever we think will be good for refugees and for the public good as a whole, but will be good for everyone involved. So a brighter future with more cooperation and mobility and more vaccines as well, now that we're all towards that too. Okay, have a great evening, Ayca. Thank you.
Well, let's leave it on that sentence. And as you mentioned, the vaccines, we can all, of course, share the common values here, having gone through the COVID-19 pandemic, and also share the same emotions, same losses, and same problems and same challenges. Maybe that as the verdict on humanity, that we might have learned a few lessons from there to take onto our next challenges to come. So thank you very much, Andreas, Papaconstantinou, Laura Battalla Adam, Professor Kemal Kirisci, Professor Şebnem Köser Akçapar, Professor Martin Ruhs, Associate Professor Saima Öztürmez, for joining us this evening on the third and last series on Turkey-EU relations. Goodbye, everyone.
Good evening.